Welcome to the Freshman Foundation Podcast, helping you make the jump from high school athletics to the collegiate level and beyond, with your host, Michael Huber.
Hey everyone, it's Mike Huber, founder and CEO of the Freshman Foundation and certified mental performance consultant. If you're listening to this episode, then you're likely a student athlete or family member of one. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Hopefully you find our podcast valuable. Mental performance coaching allows young athletes to show up at their best every single day by conquering distractions, pressures, and mental roadblocks through evidence-based strategies. So let's talk. You can visit my website at michaelv.com to schedule a free strategy session. Let's see if mental performance coaching is a fit for your family. Enjoy this episode, and thank you again for listening. How has former Division I quarterback Alex Demczak gone all in on a life of entrepreneurship? Athletics teaches many lessons. Some of them are quite hard. Athletes take emotional and physical risks that lead to disappointment and often injury. However, the beauty of being an athlete is that we learn how to endure unwanted results and grow from our failures. This is probably why so many prominent athletes ultimately become entrepreneurs. Athletes are willing to take calculated risks and take fate into their own hands. My guest in this episode is Alex Demczak, a former Division I quarterback at the University of Missouri. As a walk-on, Alex developed resilience through hard work and humbling experiences. Alex's goal was to leverage his time on the field into a college football coaching career. However, Alex soon felt a pull toward the autonomous and creative life of an entrepreneur. In episode 40, Alex talks about how his experiences led him from the football field to the corporate world and then on to becoming a professional speaker, coach, and co-author of the successful book entitled The Sale with best-selling author and influencer John Gordon. Alex discusses how he coaches others and helps them grow through his various business ventures. I'm excited for this conversation. Let's build your foundation with Alex Demczak. Hey, Alex, how are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for coming on. It's great to have you here. So, can you maybe just to get started, talk a little bit about yourself and sort of your background, in terms of, where you've been and where you're at right now?
Yeah. So I grew up as a sports fanatic, and I grew up in an awesome family in Illinois and just loved every sport I could. And eventually kind of fell in love with football the most and really had a dream of playing college football someday and just disciplined myself to do that. I remember my grandpa, he said, "Son, I don't date girls I never dated girls during high school football season." And I was like, "All right, Grandpa, I'll do that too." And I only dated one girl. I gave one exception my freshman year. But other than that, I was really disciplined. I just mentioned that to show how disciplined I was, I guess, but not saying that everyone out there needs to do that. But did that whole thing, and then had the chance to walk on at University of Missouri, and had a great experience there. Maybe we can get into that story in a little bit. And then I now live in Columbia, Missouri, as a full-time author and speaker, and travel the country, and have a wife and a 1.5-year-old daughter named Kennedy. So life is good, and just really enjoying being full-time self-employed and traveling the world.
Congratulations. And I can appreciate self-employment as something that's really enjoyable, albeit sometimes stressful. So talk about your decision to walk on at Missouri. So did you have other options? Did you have scholarship options, and why did you choose Mizzou to walk on?
Yeah, so I had other options. I mean, smaller schools. But for me at that time in my life, I was always, I just really wanted to do more coaching. And I knew that if I get the chance to walk on at a big school, this could open up doors for, being able to be a GA afterwards and get into the coaching deal. I went to a lot of those coaching conventions. So I kind of went in with that mindset. I knew how many good quarterbacks are at Mizzou. And so I was pretty, I obviously worked as hard as I can. I could. I did everything by the program. I was involved as much as I could with leadership stuff associated with the program. But I knew like my odds of playing here are not very good, but I want to make the most of this opportunity. And so I loved it. I loved every second of it. And, it was, gosh, during that time, I wanted to become a college football coach. But little did I know that today I get to do coaching through keynotes, workshops, traveling all over through books that I write, things like that. It just looks a little bit different than being a college or a high school football coach on Fridays or Saturdays, but it's, I do get to coach. And so it's just cool that some of those things that I learned in that disciplined environment of college football, it prepared me for what I'm doing now.
Yeah. So that's a pretty mature view of the world for an 17, 18, 19-year-old. So good for you in doing that. I know that, in learning a little bit more about you before the podcast, you mentioned, you talk about being cut from the team as a junior and then rejoining or working to rejoin as a senior. So if that was your mentality going in, like, hey, I'm just going here to learn and be a coach, like why try to get back onto the team your senior year at that point?
Yeah. So I guess to back up a little bit, I mean, when I was in the program, I was all in. And so for me, I knew in the back of my mind, someday when football is over, I do want to go into coaching. Now, when I was there, I was competing. I was thinking, okay, I want to move up on the depth chart. And a little bit about the story that you just mentioned, going into my junior season, things were good. Like I had a decent spring ball. I had been progressing in an upward trajectory, at least I thought, and people had told me. And things were, honestly, I had no complaints. And we were just transitioning from the Big 12 to the SEC. And I walk into a meeting. It's just a walk-on meeting that you have every single year. And I go into this room and these three coaches are sitting there, and I sit down and I could tell there was something different. And they sit down and one of the coaches says, Alex, I want to shoot you straight. We have over scholarshiped at quarterback. We're bringing in someone to take your spot. And at that time, football was my identity. That's who I was. That's what I did. Alex, the quarterback, Alex, the football player. And so in that moment, he's like, hey, it's over. You have two options. Option number one is you can stay on as this volunteer assistant coach, or you're cut. That's it. And thanks for your time. And so to your point, I did know I wanted to go into coaching, but not that soon. that was not my plan. That was not my plan, because all my great friends were on the team. They were living out their dreams. I'm thinking, man, maybe, just maybe, I'm this walk on. I can move up on the depth chart. But then I'm told this news, and it just crushed me. And so in that moment, he's like, you need to decide, right now what you want to do. And I said, well, I guess I'll stay on as an assistant coach, whatever that looks like. And so that junior season, I remember walking out of that meeting specifically and just parking my truck somewhere and just crying and feeling so humiliated. And like, this is not how I planned all this to go, And a few days later was the first practice. And so I show up to practice thinking I'm going to have this big coaching role. I'm like, you know what, maybe they'll put me up in the press box. Maybe I'll call these plays. I'll make a huge impact. But I get there, and one of the coaches, he says, Alex, I want to show you something. And he pulls out this yellow flag. And he said, when someone jumps off sides in practice, what we need you to do is blow your whistle and throw down the flag. And that was it. And I'm like, okay, I think I can handle that. And so long story short, my entire junior season, where I thought I was taking, I was getting promoted in some ways, I got the biggest demotion ever. I was throwing the flag during practice. I was in street clothes when all my friends were suited up, running out of the tunnel. I was printing off, making coffee for the coaches, printing off copies of the practice plan, doing all these little details that I feel like no one even noticed. But I will say, just for your listeners, a few things that happened during that season is, number one, the humility of it, the fact that I stuck with something and people saw that. It wasn't, it was a tough year. I didn't do it perfectly. It shook me to my core in some ways, but I stuck with it. And I said, you know what, I started here. I'm going to finish. I'm going to see this through. And then I started working on my first book that's behind me, called Thrive You, with 100 different college and pro athletes. And so what I would say to people listening is that I was in a time where I had to truly learn for myself that leadership requires no title. And doing the right things, doing the small things with excellence, like, you don't need a title to do that. And I had to fully take ownership for my own actions, my own thoughts, and say, hey, instead of blaming someone else, how can I get better? And so, like you said, I did get back on the team. I continued to work out my junior season as hard as I could. The person they brought in flaked out, and I ended up getting back on the team my senior year. We went to the Citrus Bowl. It was a great experience. But why I share that story, and I'm glad you brought it up, is because if I look at all my years as a player, but that one year where I felt like I had no title, I felt like I was a no one, I would actually argue that in some ways I made a bigger and greater impact that year when I was throwing the flag, doing the small things, than all my other years as a player. And so I think that's just, for people listening, that's the takeaway for each one of you, is that leadership requires no title. You never know how you can be used to make an impact on other people's lives, even when you're like, man, what, this is not how I planned it. And sometimes the innovation that comes from those moments is actually what makes you succeed. And just like you are successful in what you do, it's like these setbacks that are set up for these huge comebacks. And I think it's having the mentality to say, you know what, I'm going to trust the process, and I'm going to continue to work hard, even though I cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. I can't see the finished product.
Yeah. And there's so much in what you just described in terms of talking about when you started identity, right? As athletes, and this comes up a lot on this podcast, it comes up a lot with the work I do with individual athletes, is to say so much of our identity is wrapped up in being an athlete, and everything else is secondary, right? When things don't go our way, it hurts because we've invested so much time and energy in the process of being a better athlete. And then when we get a result we don't like, it makes us feel bad about ourselves. But I think what I take out of it, and I could maybe draw a line to the book, and we'll talk about the book, The Sale That's Out, you just published it. The word that comes to mind is integrity, right? Am I continuing to do what I'm asked to do without question, without, any sort of self-pity? I'm just going to go do this to the best of my ability because I have control over that process, versus like being like, no, I'm not going to do it because it's humbling and I'm going to just walk away. Right. That's that's what you described.
Yeah. And one of the most humbling things that I had to go through in that time period was I was, the assistant. I went from being a quarterback to now an assistant quarterback's coach. And so now I had to help with all this stuff. One of the hardest things I had to do was, at that time for me personally, was I had to now make the person who took my spot, I had to now make the other quarterbacks look better. That was my job now in practice. I wasn't getting paid. I was an unpaid assistant, but I had to now make them look better and make them look good in practice. And that was something that, again, humbled me pretty darn quickly and said, you know what, I either, what am I going to do? Am I just going to quit? Am I going to quit and say, oh, you know what, it didn't go my way? Or am I going to continue to do the small things with excellence, like you just mentioned? And I think we don't always know the finished product. We don't always know where it's leading us, but it's in those moments where we're just like, I feel called to be here. I don't know why, but I do feel like I'm in the right spot. I think it's those moments where we have to continue to see it through. Now, I will say that in this world of transfer portals and all this stuff, like, it is a temptation, I think, for a lot of athletes to say, you know what, the grass is greener. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with transferring, not at all. I'm just saying, I think we have to be careful as athletes, as coaches, as entrepreneurs, to say, you know what, just because one thing goes bad, I probably shouldn't transfer. But I think it's trends to look for. I think it's overall culture fit, things like that. When you consider that, but I think there are some pretty cool lessons that you learn when you stick something out like that.
Absolutely. Again, it's something I talk about with athletes. And I think it kind of goes back to me for identity, right? Like, because so much of your identity is wrapped into being an athlete, right? If you don't get that outcome as an athlete, you're going to move on to the next thing. And if we have our values are rooted in things other than our athletic identity, we're probably more likely to stay because we see the big picture, or we're willing to sort of take that, medicine and just be a part of something that, maybe isn't exactly what you want, but it's something bigger. It's a struggle though, right? It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. So I'm curious, I guess. So you played, you're back your senior year, you had a great experience. You go to the Citrus Bowl. Did you ever get a chance to coach after college, coach football?
So I did. So I became a high school coach at a local high school. I was the offensive coordinator my year or two after. And I enjoyed it, and it was a great school. It's right here in Columbia, Missouri. But just for me, some things that I saw even at the high school level, I was like, you know what? I don't know if this is really for me. I love the coaching. I love the kids, the mentorship ability, all that stuff. But for me, I think I'm just definitely wired like an entrepreneur. And, being told you have to be at an office and being told you have to be here and watching film at these certain times, I did it. But I think for me, I was just like, man, how can I take the best of coaching, being with kids, being around people, making an impact, but then kind of doing it on my own terms. And so that's kind of what I've got into now with speaking and coaching and things like that. But I could have continued in the coaching kind of world. And I think there's days where I will miss it. And I say, oh man, what if I was on the team? But the cool thing is I get to travel and speak with teams all over the country and connect with some awesome people and connect with awesome coaches as well. I mean, I still will go to these coaching clinics from time to time, and have a lot of friends who are now rising the ranks as college coaches. And so for me, it's just fun to kind of cheer them on, but also now they're the ones asking me to come speak to their teams. And so it's pretty cool, and just excited to continue to watch some of my buddies rise the ranks.
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways to skin that cat, right? And when you're an entrepreneur, you can sort of go to what appeals to you, and you obviously have to take risks to do that, but the rewards are really, really great, which is why, that dynamic exists. So how did you get involved or start working with John Gordon?
Yeah. So for the little backstory on me, the last 5 years I've been in corporate sales. I was at a great company called Veterans United Home Loans. I was slinging mortgages, and it's been a great time to be in the mortgage industry the last few years. As you know, it's a crazy market right now. But I connected with John when he spoke at Mizzou probably 6-7 years ago, and I read the Energy Bus. So I'd already reached out to him saying, hey, this Energy Bus, it's had a huge impact on my sales process. Like I really think I'm doing better in sales because I read the Energy Bus, which is John Gordon, my co-author's best-selling book. It sold millions of copies. And so that's how we connected. Then we connected when he spoke at Mizzou. And around that time, he just was kind of needing someone in a sales type role. And so again, I, just like I did as a volunteer coach, I said, hey, I'll work for you for free, just to be around you. I love your books. I'll do whatever it takes. And so I started just making sales calls for him for free and doing things I wasn't getting paid. And I had a day job, but this was kind of a side hustle for me. And I just started learning. And I would go to events that he was at, and I would just try to be around him. And I think he saw that and saw that I was willing to do things like that. And so then at some point he started then sending me opportunities saying, hey, Alex, you have this book, Thrive You. You're my first book. You should start speaking. And so then he would start sending me opportunities to speak on his books or his material. And so that's kind of how that connection started. I still do sales for him to this day, but mainly the speaking. And then obviously this book that we just came out with called The Sale. That's just a cool story as well. We were in California a few years ago. Roma Downey's sitting at the table. She's off Touched by an Angel. Jamie Garcia, he pitched for the Cardinals. Arnold Schwarzenegger walked by. Daniel Jeremiah, he's an NFL Network guy. We're all sitting at this table, and in my mind, I'm thinking, I do not belong at this table. Who am I? And we're just talking, and John asked me, hey, what's the next book you're working on? And that's where we started talking about The Sale and collaborating on that. And so,
that's awesome.
Yeah. And even for people out there that think like, oh, I want to write a book someday, literally, it's been such a rush the last month of this book launch. We just hit the Wall Street Journal bestsellers list. I'm up there. Our book is up there with Jocko, Atomic Habits, Brene Brown, all these authors that I look up to. And I'm just like, it's just wild to see our book listed up there, but it's so humbling. And, one thing I would say is people see that now, but what they didn't see is, the last few years when I remember when I first thought that I want to write a book with John Gordon. He has 25 other books, and a lot of them are bestsellers. And I remember being in Barnes and Noble, and I didn't even tell John this, but I shared the story with him on his podcast that he had me on a few weeks ago. But I literally put out all of his books at a Barnes and Noble. Like I just put them all out on a table, and I've had headphones in, and I was just looking at how he did the front cover, how he did the interior. I was really studying essentially his product, and he didn't tell me to do this. No one did. I'm sitting there with headphones in. People are probably like, what's this weirdo doing in Barnes and Noble, and I just start working, and I start writing, and I start, just doing that. And what's crazy is full circle is I'm doing that in the Columbia, Missouri, Barnes and Noble. And just a few years later, I'm doing a book signing in that same Barnes and Noble.
Wow.
For that book. And so it's so cool to think that yes, you get all the people reaching out to you now and it's so humbling and you're so grateful, but they didn't see those foundational pieces, and I think that just speaks to anyone out there that's like, man, I want to go that route or whatever it is for you. It's like, what are you doing to build this strong foundation so you can allow yourself for this on-ramp and long-term success?
That really resonates with me. I mean, I love that, because what I couldn't help but thinking is when you said that you just agreed to do some work for him for free, the word that came right into my mind is you're building equity, right? You're building equity in the relationship with this person who you're saying, I trust myself enough to add value to what you do, and I'm going to do it for free because I believe in myself. And that person saying, this person's doing this for free. They're not asking for anything back. Like, fast forward, right now you have this clear relationship, right, whether it's a business relationship, personal, or both, with somebody who is so prolific. And it's only because you took that risk and you invested in the relationship. Again, coming back to integrity, to trust of, hey, I'm willing to stick my neck out here and do whatever it takes. That goes a long way, especially as an entrepreneur. And I can't help but chuckle when you say, like, look at me now, right? Like when you're going through that grind of not making, you're not making money. You're on, like, if you're in a commission job, even like for people who are in commission jobs, like you don't get a paycheck every 2 weeks, right? You got to go out and earn your keep. And it's like, when you're having trouble putting food on the table and keeping the lights on because everything you're doing is invested in the business. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, people are like, oh, look at this guy. Like, you have no idea what Alex went through to get to where he's at, man, just grinding away. And that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. And it seems like you've earned everything that's come to this point, and I'm sure there's much more to come.
Yeah, it's a great word. And I mean, I just think back to the first time that I sent John a cold email. I mean, years ago saying the energy busted impact. Yeah, it's like, what if I would have never done that? And for people listening, it's like, what are you doing? There's a book called The Proximity Principle by Ken Coleman. It's a great read. And he talks about what you want to do, you need to be around people who are doing it at a high level. And so for me, I was willing to go and invest and be part of it and just do it for free. And so I would encourage people to do that. And even fast forward to the last 5 years, like I said, I was in sales and I had started building up this speaking thing on the side slowly. So I had, for you guys that are maybe listening, thinking about, I want to quit my job to pursue something, here's how I did it. So for 4 years, I had a corporate sales job, W-2 job. And on the side, I would build up this speaking business. And so I would literally be at my cubicle at work. I would sling mortgage loans. And then I would get on an airplane and go fly to a company and speak at their sales conference. And then I would come back to the cubicle. And it was good to a point. And it was a great company. And they were so gracious to allow me to do that. But at some point, it got to the point where I just had crazy amount of stress. I could no longer continue doing that. And I was at a point in my day job where now this side hustle and my day job were kind of clashing, and I was getting, honestly, anxiety. I started getting these heart palpitations. I had a racing heartbeat because I was trying to do so many things. And so I actually went to a doctor and they did the EKG. They said, your heart's fine. They said, but what are you doing for work? And I listed off like the 7 things I was trying to juggle. And the guy said, he's like, this is probably stress induced. And until you scale some of these things down, you're going to continue to have this. And so I did scale down. And eventually, that was in September. A few months later in December, I actually quit my full-time job because I did feel called to go all in on what I felt passionate about. And another thing I did was I met with and I talked with on the phone about 12 people. So people who are full-time speakers, full-time entrepreneurs, people who are in the mortgage industry, family members, my wife, obviously, John Gordon. I talked with 12 people and I kind of gave them my numbers. I just spilled everything. I was like, hey, this is where I'm at. Here's what I want to do long-term. And right now I'm trying to do both, but I just can't being a loan officer at a successful company. It's just a lot to handle. And it's already more than a full-time job in itself. And I was trying to do 2. And at 12 out of 12 people said, Alex, you need to go for it. Like, you don't look back. You need to go all in. And hearing people that cared about me, loved me, tell me that and say, hey, go for it. Like, you have no reason not to. That was huge. And so I'd encourage your listeners as well. If you're trying to make that decision, get around people that know you and just be vulnerable and ask them, say, hey, what do you think of this? And you'll get some really good responses. So this is about 7 months I've been all in as a full-time self-employed entrepreneur. Like you said, you're not getting a paycheck every other Friday like I was slinging mortgages, but it's unbelievable the freedom that comes from it. Yes, your days are going to look different, but it's just so freeing. Yesterday, I was at my daughter's swim lessons on Monday and Tuesday, 2 days in a row. I would have never been able to do that in my past life, just with my work schedule. And so, again, everyone sees, the now of being an entrepreneur, author, writer, all these things. But it's like, what are you doing if that's a desire of yours or whatever it is? What are you doing to build this foundation so that you can put yourself in a position to do those things?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I've had that same experience of having some really acute anxiety around what was going on in my life at a time. And I think for me, like, yeah, the accumulation of all the things you're doing at once can induce that. But I think the other thing that I learned in my life from a therapist, actually, the way she described it was, the anxiety that you're having is the difference between like who you really are as a person and like where you're at. Right. So like for me, like the way you described it is like, you were just not being true to yourself. Right. Like that anxiety comes from like, I want to be here, but I can't be because I have this other responsibility, but I don't want to be there. Right. And so once you decided to go all in, right, there's stress that comes with being an entrepreneur that you don't have if you have a W-2 job. But at the same time, you wake up every day knowing exactly what you want to do. Right. There's no fear there. It's like, I'm going to get up and do it because I love this versus like, oh, I got to get up and go to work today. And yeah, I get a paycheck, but this sucks.
Right.
It's a huge difference. Right. And so you made that choice. And listen, you're very fortunate to have people around you who all supported that because that doesn't always happen.
Yeah. And people were honest with me too. I remember one of my friends, he said, I told him and he's like, well, are you open to waiting tables and being a waiter if things don't work out? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I think if you go in with that mentality to where you're willing to do whatever it takes to provide for your family. Cause look, I mean, from the world standards, I had a mortgage. We had our 1-year-old daughter. My wife stays at home. And so from the world's vantage point, they're going, this would not be the best time for you to jump. But I just felt like things had just been aligned. And to your point, yes, there are days that are stressful because guess what? Flight delays. I'm sitting in the airport some days where I'm just like, man, I'm in the airport literally all day. What am I doing? But the stress, at least for me, is different. When I was in that corporate scene, it was a great job, but I'm not a numbers guy and I was doing a job where it wasn't even a great fit for me. And so now the stress that I have, yes, are there stressful moments? Sure. But it's not the banging my head against the wall type stress. It's a different stress. And it's sometimes it's an exciting stress. It's like, hey, I got to speak to the United States Space Force last Friday. It's like, yeah, that's a little stressful. You walk into a room, you're like, man, I never served in the military. Here's people who are giving their lives to serve. But it's a stress of like, man, I'm stressed in a good way to share something that hopefully will land with these people.
Yeah. It's incredible. I also couldn't help but think about an experience I had in the Columbia airport.
Columbia, Missouri?
Columbia, Missouri. The one time I flew out of Columbia, Missouri, probably the smallest airport that I've ever been in my life. And there was weather and we couldn't get out because it's just like 2 gates basically. And I was like, oh my goodness. So we had to stay at this Red Roof Inn overnight, which is like not in a really great spot.
Man,
So I can't imagine trying to travel from Columbia all the time to get to these places. You have to connect every single flight, I would imagine.
Yeah, I fly out of Columbia or Kansas City or St. Louis. Yeah. I'm two hours from each of them. But sometimes Columbia works great because you can connect in Dallas or Chicago and it's, pretty quick. But yeah, there's definitely those days where you're just like, man, like, you know what? I signed up for the thing is you can't have the big audience. You can't have the big stages if you're not willing to go through those other things. Like
100%.
Literally, I was at an event recently where I had to give, it was in Iowa. I had to give 6 talks and over the course of 2 days. And the night actually that I found, I got a text that said, Alex, you're officially a Wall Street Journal bestseller. Congrats. Like I was actually working out in the gym. It was before my last talk that night. And I'd already given 4 talks that day. And I was just like looking at the picture on my phone. I was like, this is nuts. Like so unbelievable. And so I had a talk a few hours later and I'm working out at the gym, feeling good. And I'm like, man, these people tonight, they probably want to hear from a Wall Street Journal bestseller. I mean, these folks in Iowa, they're getting a great deal. And that's what I'm thinking. Right. And so I walk into this room it was a parent meeting, a required parent meeting for the school district. And I guess they didn't advertise very much, but I literally walk into this room and there is one kid in the room, and one kid. And I'm like, man, I'm away from my family. I'm in Iowa I came all the way here to do this. And in that moment, I felt like, man, what am I doing here? But I just kind of heard and kind of felt like I was just being told, like, you're here for this one kid, and what are you doing to make an impact on him? And so I think in all of our lives, it's like, I hope we'd never get to the point where we look past that one person.
Yeah. And I'm glad you shared that, because it kind of makes me think about my work as well, and think about, probably the most influential book that John has written for me personally is One Word, right? And this year my word was service. And when I think about what I'm doing for people, right? If you can come across and give something to that one person, that young person particularly, who are super influential, easily influenced, you can serve that person and have them take something away that's going to make their life better, then it's a victory, right? Like, versus like, oh, I need to have 1,000 people here in order for it to be important, because you can have 1,000 people in the audience and they're all tuned out. And none of them, they don't get anything. But if that one kid's paying attention and they feel special, then you're actually doing something important.
Yeah, you said that perfectly. It's redefining success. And I think a lot of times we look at our culture, we look at social media as athletes, type A type people. That's really hard, because we look around and say, man, why can't I have that? And not only should I have it, I need to have it. And where we get into the most trouble is when we say, I deserve that. Right. So we live beyond our means to try to impress people that we don't even care about, that they don't even probably care about us. Right. And so I think that's the reminder is you need to redefine success. For me, I'm surrounded by all these great, amazing speakers that I'm connected with, that I talk with constantly. Some of these speakers do 100 gigs a year. Well, guess what? As a dad, I don't want to be gone 100 days a year. I just don't. And so for me, I want to do 36 speaking engagements a year. That's my goal. And I don't need to have the big fame of doing 100, 200. For me, I just know I don't need that additional income. And so because of that, I'm not going to have the pride to say, oh, I need to have more than my buddy. Great. That's great for my buddy. But for my family setup and for my goals and what we want to accomplish, I don't want to be gone all the time. I want to be present.
Okay, so I'm gonna draw that connection to the book, and I have a lot of questions that I want to ask. But the main character in the book is Matt, right? And what you just described is Matt was a character who wanted more to show success to other people and couldn't get away from that. So I guess I have to ask the obvious question: like, is Alex Matt?
Yeah, in some ways, I definitely did. We wanted to write the main character as someone who everyone could relate to. And I think, you even shared earlier that in some ways you could relate. And
definitely.
And so, yes, I think back to it last year when I would get a commission check from my mortgage job. And instead of being grateful for my commission check, I would say, how do I double it next month? And see, here's the thing. I didn't start out doing that. When I first, think back to the time when you first ever got a paycheck, right? You get that paycheck, you're like, oh, you're like, wow, this is great.
They're paying me. This is awesome.
They're paying me. I can't believe it. And so, but then over time, that starts to wear off, right? And so that's where I got to the point where I was so, I guess, into myself and success that I said, okay, this paycheck that was, larger than I'd ever received, instead of being grateful for it, I had to say, how can I double it? And I think that's where I had to. One other thing I noticed was, so speaking and doing these types of things are a lot more passionate to me and more of a passion of mine than doing mortgages. But what I found is I was getting so busy and trying to pursue making as much money as possible, that when I would get a speaking request, like someone would come onto my personal website, alexspeaking.com, and they would say, Alex, we want you to speak at this event. I wouldn't be excited for it. I would be like, oh, I have so many things to do at work. I guess I could try to speak at this event. And I had to consciously stop myself and say, wait a minute, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And it's speaking, writing books, leadership, consulting. Those are the types of things I want to do. but I'm putting those in the back seat now and not giving those clients my best self. And I'm like, that's when I knew there was a problem. And so, yeah, in some ways, the main character, Matt, he's a guy in the story that you guys will read that he tries to achieve success. He tries to do things at a high level, but it comes at a cost. And, for him, his cost is his wife, Kendra. She gives him an ultimatum and says, hey, if you don't change, like, we're getting a divorce. Like, I did not sign up for this. And so we tried to make the main character as someone who everyone could look at and be like, man, I've seen myself in Matt before.
Yeah. So when did you start the process of writing the book? Like when did you start thinking about it? Can you just talk me through how that went in the timeline and the process?
Yeah. I remember going on a run one day and I was just thinking and praying, and I just had a kind of a thought kind of come to me of the storyline, and I felt like God kind of placed it on my heart. And so the word integrity kept coming back, and I've had the chance to be around a lot of high capacity leaders in my life. And I've also seen on the flip side, some leaders really just create a ripple effect of some negative things. And so I've had a front row seat to both. And so the word integrity kept coming back, but I was like, oh man, like, do I write a book about integrity? Like, that is not the easiest thing to do, because for one, it puts a kind of a target on your back, right? As the author who writes about integrity, you're kind of insinuating like, oh, which that's not the case. Obviously, I'm not perfect in any way. And number two, it might be a little easier to talk about being positive, or like integrity is a kind of a personal issue for a lot of people. And so I remember just thinking on this word integrity and thinking like, man, this could be really impactful. And about a week after that, I get a phone call from an athletic director in Texas, and he asked me, hey, come speak to my staff. What are some things you want to speak on? And I kind of half-heartedly said it. I said, well, what about integrity? And I just kind of was going to like move on from it. And he was like, wait, what did you just say? I was like, oh, like leading with integrity. He's like, yes, that's what I want you to come speak on. And so that was my first ever speaking engagement in 2018. I remember they gave me $500 and they paid for my flight, and I couldn't believe it. I was like,
pretty good deal.
I was like, I couldn't, at that time, I couldn't believe, I'm like, wait, people get paid to do this. And so that's kind of what got me started, just seeing that first paycheck being like, whoa, and kind of what I do now. But yeah, that was the first time that someone, Sam Ferguson, believed in it. He's the athletic director at McMurray, a great university, and just an awesome school in Texas, and believed in me, and he loved it. I've been back there, I think, 4 times since 2018. He's I've actually had him on my podcast, just an incredible guy. And then I had the chance to give a very similar talk to 8 CEOs at the CEO roundtable, and literally 8 people. I didn't know what to expect. It's in Illinois. I walk in, it's a family friend that hosted it, and he said, hey, come speak. And after this talk, I asked for feedback. And one of the CEOs of this massive organization, he said, Alex, what you just shared with us is relevant to every single industry. I don't care what you go into. He's like, he had a big car dealership. He said, we just had an integrity issue last week, and we had to let some people go. And he said, Alex, I hope that you continue to share this message and you never stop, because it's applicable to any industry. And so it was those 2 events where I said, whoa, like, this message matters, and this message is way bigger than me. And so that's when John and I started talking about it and seeing, how could it, because that was the thing, right? Is fitting it into all of his other 25 books, because he's so talented. He's such a great writer. And it's like, how can we write this story collaboratively in a way that it also maintains the integrity of his old books? And it does. And, but it also kind of has this new twist and this new look of, hey, right now in the world, the last few years, integrity even related to airplanes is an issue. You've seen on the news there's a Netflix a documentary on Netflix right now called Downfall. And it's all about integrity in the little parts of an airplane. And so we really thought the theme of an airplane was relevant in the last few years, just because, we've seen it in the news, and a lot of people fly on planes, and it's a vulnerable thing. If you think about, man, I hope they had the integrity to put the right pieces together in the airplane and things like that. So that's kind of where it started. And John, obviously, just with his creativity, his kind of magical touch, was able to kind of put his certain things on the book and just made it great to what it is today.
That's awesome. So how long did it take you from the first time you sort of put a pen to paper till when it was published?
I would say it took longer to get it published, going through the publisher, just because, one, COVID, And then two, John had a few other books that he was releasing. So I think it was Stick Together in the Garden. So the book had been kind of done and fleshed out. It was just kind of waiting on the right timing. And so it worked out great because we had Kennedy, our daughter, during the pandemic. And so I wasn't really traveling as much for speaking. So
Sure.
Again, it was just all such cool timing that the book launched in April, 3 months after I went out as an entrepreneur. So I could literally take on any engagement. And, when you're co-authoring a book too, it probably takes a little bit longer than if you just sat down and did it. But gosh, I don't even honestly know the full time frame. I just know like when we would have it done at certain points, but then it would just be waiting on the timing of it. So I would say probably a little over a year, maybe.
Okay.
But if someone's sitting there and saying, "Hey, I want to write a book, I want to do this," it can definitely be quicker than that.
Mhm.
It was just the dynamics of his publisher, all the different things, and they're an awesome publisher. But just kind of working through all those dynamics.
So is that how you, writing the book yourself, is that how you got into the side of helping other people write their books?
Yeah. So about a year and a half ago, I had a buddy of mine who wrote a book called Gouge, and I got his book. I read it in like a day.
Mhm.
And his name's Will Severns, and I gave him a call. He lives in Kansas City, and I called him and I'm like, "Will, this was an incredible book. Have you ever thought about helping people do this?" And so we started talking, and long story short, we created a company called writemybooks.com. And
Mhm.
right now we're helping about 15 different authors write, edit, and publish their book. And then we also have some marketing options. We're helping people get speaking engagements, things like that. So for us, it's been really fun because a lot of these people have, maybe even people listening to your show have kind of this lofty goal of like, someday I want to write a book. And it's kind of this bucket list item. And we're saying, look, you have a story to share. This could help you. Having this book could help open the doors for you in speaking, coaching. It could bring in new clients, etc.
Mhm.
We've kind of condensed it. We have a team of writers now. We've condensed it down to a 16-week process. And so for people that are saying, "Hey, I want to write a book someday," we're saying, "Hey, not someday. For the first time, we're going to bring a team around you. It's very affordable. But we're going to bring a team around you. And in 16 weeks, in 4 months, your book will be on Amazon. It'll be published." And so we're just excited about that. It's been so cool that the people we're getting to steward their stories and work with them on their books. All kinds of people, from people who just want a legacy piece for their family to a financial planner, former professional athletes who one was in prison, all these amazing stories that we're getting to steward. And so, yeah, I would say it was around that time when I started having these thoughts of, man, I really
Mhm.
I like publishing books and helping people write their story, because I love writing my own books, but also love helping other people write their books. And
Mhm.
for people who are saying, "Man, I have this dream of, I would love to just write this legacy piece or something that would help me grow my business," we're bringing this team alongside them saying, "Hey, you can do it. And we have a path and a plan to make it happen for you."
Yeah, that's awesome. We were talking before we started recording, and like you're like, "Hey, you ever thought about writing a book?" I was like, "Well, yeah, sure enough, I have." And I actually started writing some stuff. And he's like, "Oh, yeah." And I was like, "Oh man," But I think I think one of the things, regardless of who you are and what you do, I think one of the things that I live by now is sort of this idea that it's never too late to do something, right? It's never too late to change your life and make a change, right? And so if I relate it back to the book, right, there's this sort of epiphany, or if you want to call it that Matt has, like where he really looks at himself in the mirror and he says, like, I need to be different, right? Based upon what the character Randy is sort of forcing him to do. He's challenging him to look in the mirror and say, I need to do something differently. So, like, can you talk about the character Randy, right? That sort of coaching, that sort of authority figure, that person who at first Matt doesn't think he's sort of anybody special or different, and then he finds out actually who he is. Like, can you just talk about how that dynamic came to be? What made you sort of gave you that inspiration for that character?
Yeah. So the cool backstory of the character Randy in the book, and for you guys that haven't read the book listening, Randy is kind of this wise sage who counsels Matt, and he gives him, these principles and laws about integrity that change Matt's life. And we can't tell you the ending of the book. We can't tell you how we can't tell you how it ends.
I'll
But
keep quiet. I actually haven't gotten there yet. I'm
Okay.
midway through, so I can't tell you the ending.
Okay, exciting. But when you do get there, I'm not going to ruin it for you either. But it's just cool to see the transformation in Matt's life, the main character, when he learns these laws. But the cool backstory to answer your question about Randy is Randy Sutherland is actually a mentor of mine who lives in Springfield, Illinois. And so it was someone growing up in youth group and high school, middle school. I had this mentor named Randy who really invested in my life, and he's always done things the right way, and someone I highly respect. And he actually owns a pizza place called Dylan's Pizza in Springfield,
wow.
Illinois. So if you're ever going through Springfield, you'll have to try it in Springfield, Illinois. It's the best pizza I've ever had. And so that's why you'll see Dylan's Pizza in the book. And so that was just a cool shout out that I'm just like, man, I have to honor Randy in this way. It just made sense. He's kind of this coach. He's been a coach for me, kind of a mentor. And so it just fit perfectly in the book. And so that's kind of why we named him that. And yeah, to your point, it is inspiring to kind of read his character in the book, because he is kind of that grandpa to everybody. He's just this person who's there for you. He just meets Matt in an airport, but here he is telling him all these life principles, and he's done it the right way. He has a crazy backstory as well. Yep. And so it's just really cool, because I think we all need someone like that in our lives.
Yeah, I certainly would agree with that. And I think, listen, the world we live in, I think I don't want to say it's harder, but it definitely seems to be more of a challenge to sort of take advice, right? To take guidance from people who know more than we do. Because I think a lot of people are very egotistical, self-centered, and we live in a world where there's so much information, whether good or bad, swirling around us, right? To have that sort of anchor in your life, someone who's going to shoot it to you straight and tell you like, hey, like you need to get your stuff together, because otherwise it's easy to sort of, go off the rails because you're doing things by your own devices.
Yeah, it's such a good word. There's a pastor. He helped create the Bible app. He's kind of an entrepreneur, honestly.
Interesting.
His name's Craig Groeschel. If you've ever read any of his leadership content, he has one of the top leadership podcasts in America. He runs, but I just have so much respect for him, because he started this essentially amazing organization with all these branches of churches all over the country. And he's just a really solid dude. He's so disciplined. I mean, he's just jacked out of his mind, just a really ripped guy, very so disciplined. But two things that he does I really respect. Number one, he has a few kind of business leaders or elders at the church. They have access to his bank accounts. They have full access. And number two, they have access to anything that he searches online, any of his history on his computer, anything. So for him, he's going, you know what? I've achieved this level of success, but I almost want to put some boundaries around this so I can allow myself to have long-term success. He doesn't have the pride to say, he literally is saying to these people at the church, he's saying, hey, I want to do it the right way. And so I want you guys to keep me in check. And so there's just things like that I think people like that I look up to and say, man, I love that. They get it. They understand that they want to have long-term success. They understand that anyone could fall prey to some of the world's trappings and say, you know what, make one bad decision that then just has a negative ripple effect the rest of their life. And so I really love being around or just learning from guys like that or guys or girls who kind of put these things in place, not in a legalistic type way, but truly a way of saying, hey, I want to have a long foundation. I want to have a long enduring family. I want to have just a life that I look back and I'm proud of. And so you said it so well there. It's like none of us are above doing some of these things in life, but what are we doing to actually be proactive about harnessing some of those things in and being and setting yourself up for long-term success?
Yeah. And one of the things that's really helped me in my life, and I've learned this the hard way, is, one of the things that really serves me well is telling on myself, right? When I do something that I'm not happy about, and I make a bad choice or I'm doing something that's not serving me well, I try to tell somebody about it, because then I'm holding myself to account. Like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, or you don't want to be doing this, but you're doing it anyway. Someone needs to know about it so that you're like, okay, like you need to get your act together, because it'd be really easy to keep it to yourself because of your pride, because of your ego, right? I don't want people to know what's going on. And, that takes a lot, because most people get very defensive when you come at them. And I was that way for a very long time. And I think that story you just told is such an important one to say, hey, I'm going to drop my ego and be like, hey, I'm interested in the long run. I'm going to hold myself accountable to other people so that I can succeed in the long run and not get sucked into short-term gain.
Yeah. And that's cool how you say that. You're a coach, but you're telling us that like you have someone that you tell things to. Definitely. And so like, that's cool. And even like Tom Brady, he has a coach for so many different things in his life. And it's like, he gets it. He's like, look, I need this accountability. And I think that's so true. It's like, having someone in your life, whether it's family, friend. For me, it's one of my friends named Nick, and we get coffee, we go work out together, we play pickleball, whatever. And it's being able to share with him and just be open. And because the thing is, if you try to just hide that and compress that inside, it's like we've kind of hit on in the book, as you'll see in the next few chapters, it really affects your performance, and it affects your mental side of things, and it affects the way you live, you know?
Well, I'll tie that to what I do as a mental performance coach. It's exactly right. Like the way you think affects the way you feel. And the way I put it to athletes very plainly is if you're not feeling good about yourself because something that's going on, you're not going to perform at your best. Right. So just having the ability to talk to somebody without judgment about like what you're feeling and what you're going through, just like letting that load go is a way to go out and be your best. It doesn't have to be anything fancy or complex. It just can be like, hey, get it off your chest so you don't have to wear it, so you can go do your thing. And I think that's really, really important. And it applies to all areas of life and all types of coaching. So a couple more questions before I let you go. So because of your age, just the fact that you're relatively young, how old are you? 29?
29. Yep.
29, right? You're a young guy and you've accomplished a ton, and you're an entrepreneur. So obviously you've always got ideas in your head, is my guess. Like, where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years? Like, where do you want to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, I think that's the hardest part about being an entrepreneur. And in the 6 months that I've been a full-time entrepreneur is you actually have to say like what's important right now, and not go down this rabbit hole of all these different ideas. And so honestly, what I've been passionate about and what I think has been really exciting to see grow is obviously my speaking and continuing to write my own books and do, leadership training alongside John Gordon with his company, but also with writemybooks.com. That's our website. Our actual business name is Streamline Books. And so being able to do both those things in unison has been pretty fun because they kind of weave together. Like I'll go speak at an event, and then I'll get off the stage and someone will come up to me and say, hey, I want to write a book. And then we end up writing their book. So they work together. And honestly, it's something that we're kind of growing this thing at a high level. So for Will and I, my co-founder, we'd love to be able to continue to grow it, bring on writers, bring on project managers that we're doing right now, and really grow that thing, because we feel like, there's a stat out there that says 81% of people want to write a book, but only 1% do each year. And so for us, we're saying there's this huge gap, and it's like, how do we narrow that and bring people into our ecosystem that we can help do that? And so honestly, if the long-term play for me is, hopefully I'll never have to go back to corporate world. Hopefully I can stay as an entrepreneur, but I'm not, whatever I have to do to provide, I'll do, but hopefully I'll never have to go back that route. But yeah, I've just continued to speak to companies. That's the cool thing about speaking is, John Gordon told me that a long time ago. He's like, you never have to retire from it. It's something that you can do less of when you're older, but he's like, you're never going to retire. And he's like, I won't retire. And I think that's a good word, because it's like after sitting on the beach for a month, you're just like, all right, what's my purpose? And so, I think just speaking and being able to work with organizations, but then also growing Streamline Books and what we're doing there is super exciting. So I hope 10 years from now, Streamline Books has a lot of employees, and we're just serving people really well. And even if no matter how big we grow, I just hope that we're able to maintain that personal touch and continue to help people steward their stories well.
Excellent. All right. So the last question I'll ask, and I ask it to everybody, maybe it's from a little different perspective depending on who you are, but like, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to a listener, whether it's about entrepreneurship, being an athlete, whatever you want, but like pick one thing and what do you think is the most important thing they need to know?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways I could go with that question, but it's a great question. But I think because we're kind of on the topic of being an entrepreneur and kind of going for it this episode, I'll say this: decide to go all in on something. That would be my advice. Decide to go all in on something, because I was at a place a year ago from now where I was kind of just scattered with all the different things I was trying to do. And it's really hard to make progress of any type. But if you're listening and you're kind of comparing what you want to do, I think you need to think forward into the future. Start with the end in mind. Think about, where do you see yourself 20 years from now? That's what I had to do. Okay, 20 years from now, I don't want to be doing mortgages, but I do want to be speaking and coaching and leading. So for me, it's a no-brainer. So figure out what is that for you, and then get the right people around you that will support you in going all in on what you want to do. And for you, maybe all in is corporate, and that's great. Maybe it's going to college. Maybe it's fill in the blank for you. When you make the decision to go in all in, there's no turning back. It's kind of like Alexander the Great, when they go to attack the Persians, he gets there with all his people, and he burns the boats. He literally burns the boat that they got there on, and all his men look behind. They're like, what the heck's going on? Why are you doing this? And he said, there's no turning back. Like we're conquering this land. And so in the same way, like I'll just get chills when I tell that story, because it's like my boss in my corporate job, when I explained to him I was quitting, he told me, he said, man, go burn the boats. And I think that's so true. It's like, you have to make the decision to go all in, because no one will make it for you.
That's true. It's a great way to end. I appreciate that. Alex, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast. It was great to get to know more about you. You're such an interesting guy, and you have such a bright future. So I really appreciate you joining me here.
Hey, I've heard great things about the show, and this was awesome. You ask awesome questions. So thanks so much. Looking forward to staying in touch, and thank you. Thank you for doing it.
Same here. Take care, Alex. So, what was your biggest takeaway from my conversation with Alex Demczak? For me, it's that success should be self-referenced. Alex is taking great risks to design his ideal professional life. Major investments in himself led to meeting renowned author John Gordon, writing best-selling book The Sale, and spreading his message of integrity as a coach and speaker. Alex's ability to deal with adversity in his athletic career helped him follow his heart to go all in on entrepreneurship. My suggestion to young athletes is to humble yourselves when asked to do so. It may make you angry and uncomfortable at the moment. However, developing humility is likely to give you the tools to succeed when you're ready to pursue your desired path, whether in athletics or other facets of life. I want to thank Alex for his generosity and the wisdom he shared with the Freshman Foundation community. You can learn more about Alex on his website at alexspeaking.com. You can follow Alex on Instagram at Alex Demczak, and you can find his book, The Sale, on Amazon. To learn more about how mental performance coaching can help your mind work for you rather than against you, visit michaelvhuber.com. Thank you for listening. We'll see you back in 2 weeks, ready to get better.
Mike Huber is the founder and owner of Follow the Ball Coaching, located in Fairhaven, New Jersey. He is a mental performance coach and business advisor dedicated to serving athletes just like you reach their full potential on and off the court. The Freshman Foundation is all about helping you get to the next level. For more information, follow along on Instagram at the Freshman Foundation. Please subscribe. Give us a like on iTunes, Spotify, leave a review, tell a friend. Most importantly, come back in 2 weeks, ready to get better.